and welcome to this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hennig. This week, we're going to get into some topics from the NFL, the NBA, also touch on some topics in the Marvel Cinematic and Television universes, and also we'll wrap up with a little conversation about the TV show on the CW Black Lightning and how well it's doing and why it's doing so well. So let's get started right here on this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz podcast. Have to start off the podcast this week talking about some NFL news. So a lot of rumors and reports coming out this week about the potential of the Giants being open to trading Odell Beckham Jr. And I say, if the New York Giants can get a value in a trade, they should absolutely make a move. Look, Odell Beckham Jr. may be one of the three best wide receivers in the NFL. To me, Antonio Brown's the number one receiver, but part of Odell being one of the elite receivers in the game, we're running into this issue with him when it comes to his lack of self-awareness. And this is not just, issues off the field, because some of what's happened to him off the field, it has to do with just wrong place, wrong time, not having the best judgment. Hanging around the wrong people, talking to the wrong people. People were very hypercritical of him when he was hanging out with Johnny Manziel. We all know about the pictures that came from France when he was over there. A lot of this stuff is subject to perspective, but Odell is a malcontent. He's made some bad decisions on the field. He's not the best locker room guy. He's a very much a me-first guy. I don't care that he's a hard worker. I don't care that if he is one of the most talented receivers in the NFL. The reality, and I said this on 97.3 ESPN radio this week when I've been covering for Middays with Rich Quinones, I've been saying this week that elite wide receivers don't win championships. You don't need a receiver to win. You need receivers who can catch the ball, but you don't need receivers to help you win championships. The wide receiver's success is so hyper-dependent on the quarterback getting him the ball. It doesn't matter how talented you are. What matters is, can somebody get you the ball, the timing of the route, the fade pass to the corner of the end zone, the crossing route for first down. Whatever the play may be, if the quarterback isn't good enough to get you the ball, it's worthless. I know some people like to point to the fact that when Odell Beckham Jr. got there, Eli Manning got better for the first 2 years Odell Beckham's been in the league. I totally get that. But since then, Odell Beckham has gone down. His catch percentage has gone down. His drops have gone up. The ego has gotten more inflated. You could argue that Odell Beckham Jr. has started buying his own press clippings. So as a result, I think that Odell has become bigger than the team. And when he says stuff like, I want to be the highest paid player in the league, or allowing rumors to get out there that he's not coming into Giants camp unless he has an extension, those are the kind of things that get a guy scorned in a locker room. Those are the kind of things that cause players to say, well, who does he think he is? Look at the Super Bowl winning teams. The Eagles' best receiver was Alshon Jeffrey. Patriots, Julian Edelman. Ravens a few years ago, Anquan Bolden. The Seahawks, Doug Baldwin. Are you seeing a pattern here? Let's go back even farther. Packers had Donald Driver and Greg Jennings. The Steelers, the 1 year was Santonio Holmes. Another year it was Hines Ward. The Giants, Plexico Burress. Are you seeing a pattern here? There is no elite receivers winning Super Bowls. You don't see Julio Jones on that list. His team lost. You don't see Mike Evans on the list. His team hasn't even made the postseason. DeAndre Hopkins has had some of the worst quarterback luck in the league. Calvin Johnson, when he was great, he never got to a Super Bowl. Having a great receiver doesn't change a team, but getting a great return on investment in a trade for Odell Beckham Jr. can definitely help you win a championship. The Giants need to make a decision. What is more important to them? Dealing with Odell Beckham Jr.'s baggage or winning a championship in this small window they have left with Eli Manning, which is, to me, about 2 years. I think with Eli being on a contract for 2 more years, I think that tells you right there where the mentality is for this team. If everything the scouts and the experts say about Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry is true, that they look out for each other, they keep each other in line, they keep each other humble when they played at LSU together, if all those things are true, then the team that Odell needs to go to is the Browns. Because if Landry and Odell can keep each other in line, make sure the other doesn't step outside the line too far, they keep each other accountable. Listen, if there's a buddy system there, maybe that's the team he needs to go to, because some of the stuff he's saying and doing is just counterproductive, and overpaying him would be fiscally irresponsible by the Giants, and giving him a contract extension for too long at this point when he's coming off an injury, when he's had back-to-back years where he has precipitously gone down in catch percentage and going up in drops. That's not responsible on the field either, aside from just fiscally irresponsible. Topic number 2 this week on the Mutant Blitz podcast. There's a lot of chatter on the internet, and nothing's been confirmed or not, but there's a lot of chatter. This is possibility the final season, this current season, season 5, the final season for Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And part of the speculation comes from the fact that the show has not been renewed yet for its 6th season, and some of the showrunners are saying in interviews that, you have to write a show so that the final can be a final for the show, but still leave enough of an open ending just in case you want to bring the show back. It almost sounds like they themselves, the writers of the show and the showrunners, are mentally preparing for a coming end. And I've mentioned in previous episodes here on the Mutant Blitz podcast, the further the show got away from its original intent, the harder it has been to rationalize keeping the show on the air. The original purpose of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was to fill in gaps between the Marvel movies, to bridge certain gaps between the movies, and kind of give an explanation of where the Marvel characters are in the overall universe. Well, the longer the show is going on, the more it feels like that the show is less about being a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but instead has carved its own niche in the Marvel Universe. Aside from the fact that there's a ton of things that happen in the show that are absolutely not believable that some superhero wouldn't have showed up for said event or been around for said issue. Like the first couple seasons when you saw Lady Sif show up and you saw Samuel L. Jackson's Nick Fury show up, it made sense because you're like, all right, well, this is a big enough deal for this person to show up. But now you have almost nobody showing up in the show. And I think that's where the problem has started to become. The show has drifted more into the Inhuman conversation. And while it's cool that you're expanding the universe and you're branching off into different things, the further you get away from its intent, there's less connectivity. There's less connective tissue. You're telling me that now with all the superheroes that are out there, Iron Man, Steve Rogers, Falcon, Ant-Man, Black Panther, Thor comes and goes. Even lesser heroes. You want to say maybe Black Widow or Hawkeye. You're telling me they never ran into any of them at some point? None of them. Like, not even once. These apocalyptic, almost like endings of each season. Nobody showed up when they found out that the reason Hydra even was created, Hive. No one was like, hey, maybe we should call an Avenger or somebody to help us. And then they end up having to go into the future, come back from the future. And every scenario, nobody can save the world but them. Again, it's just becoming less and less believable. When they came out with the show Inhumans, the Inhumans show was never connected to the MCU. You didn't know how it related to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. You didn't know how it related to the movies. You just knew that there were Inhumans in the world and they happened to go to Hawaii. But at no point did they run into anybody. No Daisy Johnson, no Steve Rogers, as he's been a fugitive with his Secret Avengers initiative. Nobody. They never ran into anybody. So it was hard for viewers, when they have no background or foundation, to make a jump with the show. Agent Carter was never meant to be a long-term show. It was meant to bridge the gaps and fill in voids. Now, I loved Agent Carter. I'm disappointed they didn't make a third season because I felt they could have done a couple different things with that show. But this is where Marvel has kind of spread themselves thin. They've invested so much into the Netflix shows, which is kind of their way of doing HBO Showtime type of shows. You know, you're going to get your Billions, your Power, your Ray Donovan, Marvel versions of those shows on Netflix. So when you think about it, you're dealing with characters in a universe that is interconnected. You understood, okay, these guys are the ground level of New York, and they reference things that happen in the movies. They reference things outside of their space. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't do that, and I think that is going to be a stumbling point for them moving forward. I think you have to strongly consider if Marvel wants to keep up with this show, even if it's only TV show at this point. You know, maybe they could find a way to take one of the Netflix shows and put it on ABC to kind of take the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D's place. Maybe into a spinoff, you know. Maybe you do a Daisy Johnson spinoff show. Or maybe you do a Fitz and Simmons spinoff. Or you try to connect one of the other shows to this show. There's a lot of different ways you can make this work. But I think at the end of the day, they're going to have to find a way. Because the way it's going right now, it's just not going to work in the long run. And it's a shame because they could have done so many possibilities with this show, really interwoven it into the movie universe, and they didn't. What they did instead is they were hyper-focused on building this whole new expansive identity with this show instead of just focusing on its original intent. And when they got away from the original intent, that's where they slipped and fell. Topic number 3 on this week's Mutant Blitz podcast. I started talking about the NBA MVP race last week, and LeBron has now personally chimed in on the NBA MVP race. LeBron James has said this week he would have voted for himself for NBA MVP this season. And guess what? I too would choose LeBron James over James Harden any day of the week in an MVP conversation. Look, this is not meant to be an attack on James Harden, although I do think James Harden in many ways is overrated. I think in many ways James Harden is treated like he is much more of a dynamic talent and star than he really is. But James Harden is having an outstanding season. He's putting up a lot of great numbers, and he is a major catalyst in the Rockets' success. But as I said on last week's podcast, the V in MVP stands for valuable, not outstanding. The MVP award should be voted on who is most valuable, not just who is putting up the most gaudy stats. So who is more valuable to their team, LeBron to the Cavs or Harden to the Rockets? Well, it's hands down, it's LeBron to the Cavs. If you take LeBron James off the Cavs, you take Anthony Davis off the Pelicans, those are two teams that are headed straight to the NBA lottery, no questions asked. But the reality is that because there's a history of the MVP award going to the best player on the best team, which in many ways I would argue is a bit of an abomination. You know, just because a guy is on the best team doesn't mean he's always the best player, and vice versa. Just because you have the best team doesn't mean they have the best player either. What happens in history doesn't make doing the same mistake today okay. It's unfair for these voters to pass such an extreme judgment against somebody and for somebody else just because they either don't want to give LeBron the award again or because they don't want to, overlook the fact that James Harden's having a good season. It's unfair for voters to vote just based on you don't want somebody to win or because somebody won last year or someone didn't win last year or you want to do a make good. That's not fair to the guys who are playing this year. The award should be voted on not based on media hype, not based on what's trendy. Let's stop kidding ourselves and let's give it to the players who really deserve it. And if the conversation comes down to LeBron versus Harden for MVP, it should be 100% LeBron's and not James Harden's. Topic number 4 on this week's Mutant Blitz podcast. I spoke about Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. earlier. Well, co-star of the show, Clark Gregg, will be a part of the star-laden cast of the movie Captain Marvel, which will be coming out next year. It's currently filming, and we're finding out that it's going to be set in the 1990s. So you're going to be following a superhero in a movie that is a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe that came before Iron Man, before Thor came to Earth, before the Avengers, maybe 15 years before Iron Man, depending on what year they actually set it at. And it's going to involve a very powerful female superhero who is learning how to help people and how to be a hero in a world that doesn't really have superheroes. And this is a great twist on expanding the Marvel Cinematic Universe to open up new possibilities and then allow Captain Marvel to kind of slide into the next stage of the Marvel Universe, especially since someone as powerful as she is and someone as game-changing as her character can be, I'm very excited for it. You know, I saw this one story about the actress Emily Blunt, who was in The Devil Wears Prada, saying how unhappy she was that she never even got to audition or be considered for Captain Marvel. Listen, young lady, stop being a spiteful little. You don't even look like you should be Captain Marvel. It doesn't look like you should be Carol Danvers. Brie Larson looks like Carol Danvers, not just because she has blondish hair, but because physically she looks like the character, especially the classic version of the character, the one that not the newest version with the very trendy hairstyle. Some of these actors and actresses, they think that they're set for roles, but Marvel knows what they're doing. You look at every casting job that they have done for these movies, I can't disagree with any of them. I think they have nailed every single one. You could disagree with certain roles for maybe the TV shows or what DC does with some of the movies and TV shows. Marvel, they're hitting on such a high percentage. I have no question when they said no to Emily Blunt. There had to be a reason why they never called her, aside from just because she doesn't look like the role. But anyway, back to the movie. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, this movie, and I think this is going to be, for Marvel, what Wonder Woman was for the DC Universe, which is a powerful female superhero who can stand on her own 2 feet, who doesn't need to be teamed up with a dude. And it's also going to be a star-laden cast. You're going to have Samuel L. Jackson reprising as Nick Fury because it's in the 90s. And as I mentioned, Clark Gregg is going to be in the movie as well. You're also going to see some characters from other movies as well making appearances because, again, this is set in a world pre-Iron Man. I'm very excited for this movie. I think it's going to be really awesome. And I think it's cool that they're going to use this movie to kind of connect some dots and bridge some gaps that we never knew about because we don't know nothing about the 90s in the Marvel Universe. We know some about the 40s and 50s. We've been suggested things about the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but the 90s are pretty much a blank slate, so this should be a lot of fun. Topic number 5 on this week's Mutant Blitz podcast. We saw over the weekend an article on CBS Sports website. Never heard of this author before in my life. Maybe the reason why is because of posts like this. He wrote a post naming Vince Young the biggest draft NFL quarterback bust of the BCS era. So it's a time period from 1999 to 2014. So this author, in his zeal to maybe make a clickbait headline or to, put out there his opinion that he felt so strongly about, is overlooking Jamarcus Russell, Joey Harrington, Tim Couch, Akili Smith, and many other quarterbacks who were high draft picks, who were busts during this era, to go after Vince Young. See, this is the problem with the world when it comes to analyzing the quarterback position. You're taking a guy who had over 30 wins as a starting quarterback, a guy who was a multiple-time Pro Bowl selection, and saying he is more of a bust than Matt Leinart, than Christian Ponder, than Joey Harrington. I mentioned Akili Smith and Jamarcus Russell. There is a whole laundry list of players who have been draft busts, quarterback and not. But you're going to pick a guy who actually had limited success. It's pretty ridiculous that this is our way of analyzing the quarterback position. But this is why there are so many quarterback busts. This is why guys get hyped the way they do. Because we live in a world where Vince Young is considered the greatest bust of an era. But we're also telling Lamar Jackson that he should probably be a wide receiver. Yet, it was 18 years ago we drafted Michael Vick first overall. The inconsistency is just astronomically horrible. It's unfair to the athletes. It's just intellectually dishonest to fans and viewers. You look at this year's draft class and you listen to how the analysts critique them. You look at a guy like Josh Allen. The more you hear about him, it's about his height, his arm strength, his physical ability. It's not about his pocket presence. It's not about his ability to make great passes. It's not about anything except for his physical abilities. We've heard this story before. Jamarcus Russell and Tim Couch. Putting up gaudy stats in college doesn't always guarantee success in the NFL either. Just look at Ryan Leaf. There's plenty of quarterbacks who have put up big numbers in college. There's plenty of quarterbacks who have physical skill. But everyone in the NFL can throw the ball. They may not all have the best arm strength, but guys in the NFL can throw the football. So when you think about it, what is the things that should count? Well, I'm going to tell you real quick my criteria. Number one, your completion percentage. Your completion percentage typically doesn't get better in the NFL. It gets worse because you're playing against better competition. You're playing against players who are going to be more adept into handling you, and you're playing against teams that literally their one job in life is to stop you. In college, that is not their one job in life. That is not one responsibility. When you think about it, it's hard to be better in the NFL than you were in college. The second issue that you have to look at with quarterbacks in college is, did they have moments where they made NFL plays? I don't just mean NFL throws, because there's a lot of guys who make the quote-unquote NFL throw. But not everybody guy makes the NFL play. Sensing the blitz coming from your blind side, rolling out to your right, looking off the safety, throwing the opposite direction, making the first down or the touchdown despite of the chaos around you. And how many of those plays are you making? Are you making it once, twice, numerous times? Look at a guy like Josh Rosen. Josh Rosen led his team back in so many games, and he had to because the defense couldn't stop people. You look at how many times Josh Rosen made decisions in the pocket, sliding in the pocket, looking off a defender, making the pass, going through his progressions. You didn't see that consistently from Josh Allen. You saw it more from Sam Darnold than Josh Allen. You saw it more from Lamar Jackson than Josh Allen. You saw it more from Baker Mayfield than Josh Allen. But again, GMs, analysts, coaches, they fall in love with the physical abilities instead of the football player. Russell Wilson was too short. Drew Brees' arm wasn't strong enough. Peyton Manning couldn't win the big game in college. Tom Brady didn't have what it takes to play in the NFL. There's a whole list of guys who there was every reason why they couldn't be successful in the NFL, and yet they were anyway. Why is that? Because they can play the game of football. Now, some of it is luck. You go to the right situation, you go to the right circumstances. You know, Drew Brees would have ended up in Miami instead of New Orleans. Would he still have had the career that he did? Maybe, maybe not. We don't really know. What we do know is that you can't judge quarterbacks purely based on either stats or physical ability. I would argue that Vince Young, what he did in his time in Tennessee, was exceptional considering how many quarterback careers Jeff Fisher practically destroyed. He almost destroyed Case Keenum's career. He almost ruined Jared Goff before he got started. Sam Bradford, he was a lot better after he left Jeff Fisher, that's for sure. I would argue that Vince Young was the second most successful quarterback under Jeff Fisher, and he did it despite Jeff Fisher, not thanks to Jeff Fisher. He's not a draft bust. He had some success, and then his career had a drop-off. Part of that's the coach's fault, part of it is his fault. But he is not one of the biggest draft busts of all time. And anybody who thinks so doesn't understand the game of football or how to evaluate the quarterback position. Final topic on this week's six-pack on the Mutant Blitz podcast. The CW debuted the show Black Lightning this year, marking now the 5th DC Comics based superhero show that is on the network. Since its debut, the show has actually climbed the list as now the third most watched show on the network, slightly ahead of Supernatural and right behind superhero cousins The Flash and Supergirl. Now, TV viewership is subjective because more and more people are watching shows on either on-demand and DVR and not live, as well as people who have cut the cord. They're now watching shows on YouTube TV and Hulu and Netflix and Roku and so on and so forth. So it's hard to truly measure how many people are watching because of the fact that many of the measurements for ratings are based on linear traditional rating systems, not based on the modern digital age as much. But for Black Lightning to have so many viewers at the start of its run is a testament to CW understanding how to ride the wave of pop culture's views toward television shows and superheroes. You've heard me say on this podcast previously that Black Lightning is DC and CW's way of replicating the success that Netflix had with Luke Cage. And it's not just because of the color of the skin of the superhero, but it's also the style of shooting, it's the style of the angles, the style of the more of the urban theme element to the show. I think this show does still have potential, but it's going to be interesting to see how they interweave it with the other shows, because eventually the people at CW are going to realize they're going to have to do with Black Lightning what they did with The Flash and with Supergirl and with the other shows, and that is they're going to have crossovers, because the crossovers allow exposure of the characters to other shows, and it will help populate viewership across all platforms a little better. They got a lot of questions to answer. Is Black Lightning on Earth 1 with the Flash and the Arrow? Is he on another Earth, like with Supergirl's universe? Is he actually in the past or the future? See, we don't really know exactly. We assume that Black Lightning is in 2018, right? We're assuming that based on the 30-year estimate that they're saying about the death of the main character, Black Lightning's father. Jefferson Pierce is the character who plays Black Lightning. His father was murdered by the one villain they claimed it to be 30 years ago. Under that premise, they're saying it's around 1985. Well, if you're going to make a literal reference point and literally go 30 years, that's 2015. So is there a possibility that Black Lightning is happening 3 years before the rest of the other superhero shows have happened? Or again, is this on another Earth? These are all kinds of questions they're going to have to answer if they do the crossovers like they do with the other shows. I think what helped Black Lightning is the show got off to such a good start. I would argue that of all of the CW superhero shows, Black Lightning had the best pilot episode of all of them. I would argue that there is the potential for Black Lightning to become the number 2 highest rated superhero show on the CW in due time. I don't think it's going to take too long. You know, Supergirl, it's got its moments, but the show definitely lacks long-term sustainability, just as it's comprised currently. And this whole female villain versus female hero thing, we saw it on The Flash. It actually hurts the show with time, because all Flash did was kept fighting other speedsters. It was Eobard Thawne, it was Savitar, it was Zoom, you know, it's all of these speedsters. And then finally you have a season now where you have a villain that is a different type of villain and a massively different challenge. But if you look at the ratings from last year to this year, they're down 20% for Flash, even though Flash is still the number 1 superhero show on the CW. If Black Lightning can avoid the pitfalls of the other shows, of Supergirl, of Arrow, it has the ability to sustain. And I think that right now, if I had to rank the CW shows on viability long term, number 1 is Flash, because the characters are popular, they're a lot of fun, and there's so many things they haven't done with Flash yet that they still have the opportunity to do. The number 2 show definitely right now is Black Lightning, because Black Lightning is still new, it's still fresh, and they have barely scratched the surface on what they're going to do with this superhero family. You know, Lightning and Thunder and the other daughter has powers, And, this whole deal with the metahumans, there's so many variables that go into the show they could do long term. The show that has the least viability right now is DC Legends of Tomorrow, just because how many times can you travel back in time, fix things, undo things, changing the course of history, and it not affect the other shows? That's just silly. Eventually, they're going to have to, bring that show to a nice conclusion. I don't know if that's next season or the season after, but I think that there's a way that they can stop doing time travel and just allow some of those characters maybe to have a different type of show. Maybe you put them all in Detroit with Vixen. And you have Vixen, and you have the character Nate who can turn into Steel, whether it's Ray Palmer. There's a way they could, spin off the show and put it in Detroit with Vixen and make it successful, a little superhero team. I think Arrow is, I don't think it's at the end of its run, but I think that's only got a couple more years left, because this season has really shown that there's only so many ways you can take Oliver to hell and back, and the guy still come out the other side okay. It's getting really rough on the guy, and I really feel bad for him because he's turning into one of the most misunderstood characters on all television. There's only so many ways you can write that show after a while, unless they drastically change the style of the storytelling to make it a little bit more adaptable and evolve the show and evolve the characters a little more than they have. Although I would argue that Arrow is the standard for the other CW shows, because it's typically had the best writing, typically had the best storytelling, and typically had the most depth of all the shows, because remember, Arrow has no superpowers, no super speed, he wasn't raised from the dead, he's not a super smart scientist, he doesn't have lightning powers, so it takes even more creative thought and creative writing to make his character compelling, and they've done a great job with that. But I think that show is running out of time as well. And to me, Supergirl, at some point, Supergirl has to be more than just Supergirl saves the day. Supergirl finds a villain who is very, very difficult to deal with. She has to find her way, discover herself. She likes the guy. They find they can't be together. And then she moves on to the end of the season. You have a cliffhanger. It'll be interesting to see where Black Lightning goes after this first season. Do they expand his universe? Do they bring people into his city of Freeland? Do they dig deeper into his past with what happened to his father? Do they dig into other things, other characters, like his ex-wife and maybe her past? Or do they dig into more of the metahuman conversation? I think there's a lot of ways they can go with it, and it'll be interesting to see what they do. They're still trying to find their way. They're still trying to find their feet. And I think that by the end of the season, we'll have a better idea of what the show plans on doing. But I definitely think it has some viability long term. It just needs to get a little less preachy. Just find your own identity, run with it, and have some fun with it. I do like the family aspect of the show, the emphasis on, the relationship between parents and their kids. I think those are all positive things. But there are some aspects of the show that get a little preachy, and I think that preachiness will turn off certain viewers. But I think in the long run, the show has a lot of viability if they do it right. That's it for this week's edition of the Mutant Blitz podcast. No one-on-one conversation this week. We had some scheduling conflicts with some potential guests, but stay tuned. Heading into April, we're going to have a lot of guests for you to look forward to in the one-on-one conversations. We'll be getting back to that next week here on the podcast. And of course, each week we'll be still bringing you the six-pack of topics. Of course, if you like this podcast, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and if you have some thoughts or feedback, drop it down in the comments section. Tell me what you think about the topics you brought up today. If you agree with some of the things I said, disagree, or whatever may be on your mind. I always appreciate the feedback, and thanks for listening each week to the Mutant Blitz podcast. I'm Josh Hennig. Catch you next week.